Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. My name is Liaquat Zaman. Hope you guys are having a wonderful time. Right, we are going through the 40 hadith of Mulla Ali Qari. We've actually come almost close to the end of Ramadan. I know it's a very kind of emotional, sad time. Ramadan's ending. But inshallah, we will be continuing the hadith after Ramadan. So, if you guys are not familiar with my channel, with the videos that I make, please check them out. Hit the subscribe, hit the like button, and make dua for my channel as well. Jazakumullah khair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Al-munta'idu raqibun. He who wears shoes is considered a passenger. Narrated by Ibn Asakir. Okay, so this is the hadith. Now, this hadith is, again, a very interesting hadith. I like this kind of hadith. It kind of gives you a very nice insight into the Prophet ﷺ, his sayings, and understanding more about Islam as well. So, first of all, if a person basically wearing shoes, okay, wearing shoes. Now, as we all know, if a person, for example, like walks somewhere, then they get to a certain distance where they naturally will get tired, exhausted, right? So there's a point that you reach where you can say you start to get fatigue and you get tired, right? And so some people, to overcome this, what they do is they ride an animal, right? So you might want to, let's say, for example, get an animal, right? So you get onto the animal and you basically just ride the animal, and you can go anywhere you want. In fact, you can actually go a longer distance before the animal will get tired. All right, so here the animal will get tired at a longer distance. Right, so these are very sort of like, you can say, practical measures for helping us to be able to overcome long distances. In fact, the Quran even mentions this as well. وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْبِغَارَ وَالْحَمِيرَ لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً. That the khayl, the bighal, the hamir, the horses, the mules, the donkeys, Allah has created them, and humans can utilize their long distance traveling ability to be able to traverse the land. Right? So this is something which, to get to a place that you can't. So the Prophet ﷺ, he also mentioned the example of a rider, and he said, shoes or slippers, rather, munta'il, slippers, wearing slippers. Slippers is basically, say for example, you have your foot. If you have a bare foot, a bit of a strange looking foot, like an alien foot there, this foot has a sole, and that sole is fairly delicate, you can say. So it's a delicate sole, and people, when they walk on bare ground, I've experienced this so many times, trying to walk on barefoot in the garden, or maybe going to the beach or something, and small little pebbles and stones and thorns get stuck in your feet, ouch. So the foot actually is sort of like at risk of being injured. So when you wear shoes, so let's say for example a person was to, let's say, wear some shoes, cover their feet, and they had a sole on, then that sole actually, that slipper actually allows the person to be able to walk a longer distance before their feet start to blister and hurt. So, in fact, the Prophet ﷺ, he described this, and he said that the one that wears the shoes is considered to be like a passenger on a vehicle, like riding on a vehicle. In other words, just as this vehicle gives ease to the person, likewise, these slippers give ease to a person as well. Now this, I think, is a beautiful example of the Prophet ﷺ, where he was also concerned about the welfare of a person as well. Right? So he would give people advice, on various topics. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, let's say, would talk about, Islamic issues that were like per se Islamic per se, like prayer and fasting and money, your income, etc., all these things. And he would also talk about things that were general advice in life, right? So in life advice, he would also talk about these, even though these were not necessarily Islamic themselves, right? So for example, like the Prophet ﷺ, on one occasion, he said to people, right, if you're going to walk, don't walk with one shoe. Like if you're going to walk, it just looks silly walking with one shoe, without one shoe. Either wear 2 shoes or just don't wear any shoes. So this is not necessarily an Islamic ruling where a person will be sinful for not doing it, but the scholars say this is considered to be something which is just general advice the Prophet ﷺ was giving. Just like nowadays we have advice, look both ways before you cross the road, don't throw litter on the floor, and so forth. He also mentioned about drinking in 3 sips or 3 breaths as well. So again, this would be some advice, health advice, that a person, if they drank all in one gulp, that they might hurt themselves, they might find it difficult breathing. So he gave them advice and said, drink in 3 sips. He also gave advice and he said, not to sleep on your belly. Right? So he gave advice and told people not to sleep on their belly, because again, this was something which was to do with the idea of harming yourself. Sleeping on your belly could potentially be difficult for a person to breathe or hurt themselves or not give them a satisfying sleep. And one more, he actually said, do not run to salat. Right? So interestingly, running to salat is also another thing. If you run to salat, you might fall over, you might injure yourself, you might hurt someone else. So these pieces of advice the Prophet ﷺ gave were practical, you can say practical pieces of advice. Very practical, nice piece of advice the Prophet ﷺ would give. Would not necessarily fall under the same scope as the Islamic rulings, as let's say doing wudu or praying salat, fasting or hajj, or those things where there's sin or there's reward attached to it. Exactly. Here, these would be more general to do with your life. And scholars have discussed things like, for example, standing up and drinking water. Is that considered to be something which is an Islamic issue, or is it something which is general advice of life? And likewise, eating with your hands or eating with a fork or a spoon, sitting on a table, and all these things as well, which many of the scholars have generally considered this to be practical pieces of advice. So, Jazakumullah khair. I hope you guys benefit from this hadith. It's a very interesting hadith, very sort of like gives you a different understanding of how the Prophet ﷺ would advise people in various things. Jazakumullah khair. So let's just recap this. So shoes, the person who walks on foot will actually get tired after a while, and so they might prefer going in a vehicle. Likewise, a person walking barefoot might hurt themselves. So better than walking barefoot, a person should wear slippers. In fact, human beings are probably the only creatures on earth that actually wear, footwear. And in today's times, you can find so many different types of footwear that people actually wear. And also the rulings with regards to Islamic per se rulings, and rulings which were generally just for life, which were not necessarily attached to any specific Islamic topic or concept. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you to all my patrons for all your support. May Allah bless all of you guys. And hopefully, inshallah, I will see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.